Luke, thank you for coming on, man. Glad
Hey,
to have you here.
Antonio. Thanks so much for having me, man. Appreciate it.
I thought we could start by really defining what mimetic theory and mimetic desire mean.
Sure. Memetic theory is this big, sweeping theory of human culture, human interaction, and desire. So let's not try to do the whole thing up front.
Hmm.
Let's just start with memetic desire
Okay.
and let's do it little by little. All right. So memetic desire is a phenomenon first identified by a French thinker named René Girard, who came to the US shortly after World War II. And through his studies of literature, history, anthropology, philosophy, he was this great interdisciplinary mind. We don't have that many of these kind of people in the world today. We're so specialized, but he was very interdisciplinary. And what he noticed about human desire is that it's mimetic, it's imitative. So we normally think of the reason that we want things as, well, we normally don't think about it a whole lot at all. We just kind of take our desires for granted. Or we have this idea of our wants as being spontaneous. Like
Mhm.
I wake up in the morning and I want this thing, and I don't really question why. Girard's insight is that desire, most all of desire, maybe all of it, is in fact imitating the desires of other people who he calls models of desire. And this is really important to understand. This is kind of contrarian. It's not the way that we normally think of desire. It's kind of humbling. We normally don't like to think of ourselves as being imitative or derivative of anything or anybody. We're kind of our own imperial, totally autonomous selves. And that's how we like to think of it. But man, we're incredibly social creatures as human beings. And it's this mimetic desire that opens us up to other people, that allows us to enter into relationships. And it has a lot of consequences, which form the rest of mimetic theory. And let me just stop and point out one thing, because some of the listeners might be wondering already, like, well, is all desire imitative? Do I need to have a model to imitate, to like drink like a glass of water or something like that? The answer is no. So like these are physiological, kind of like hardwired instinctual responses that we have. I don't need to imitate anybody's desire. If I'm dying of thirst in the desert, I'm going to go drink water. If I'm hungry, I'm going to eat. If I'm cold, I'm going to seek warmth. Those things we have instinctual responses for. Girard was concerned about the universe of desire beyond those things, where we don't have any kind of built-in signposts or mechanisms that help us determine what to pursue.
Hmm.
And he realized that for all of this stuff, which is 99.9% of life, maybe like close to 100, maybe 100% today, we rely on external things, and we find them in the form of other people, other groups, real or fictional, that act as signals for what is wantable and what's wantable. And the rest of mimetic theory, all of it starts with this idea of mimetic desire, this realization that desire is mimetic. That leads to all kinds of consequences, including rivalry and conflict. Girard thought that mimetic desire is the root of human conflict and even violence, because if we want the same things that other people want, where we start competing with them, we become their rivals, and this leads to all kinds of conflict and tension and pretty nasty things.
Hmm. So, from my understanding, mimetic desire is just getting desires from mimicking other people, which you call models.
Exactly. Models. And models can be people, they can be groups, they can come from the past. They can be ideas that we have in our head. Some people's model of desire is an idealized image of themselves.
Hmm.
And we typically think of these are like narcissists, right? They
Yeah.
have this model in their mind of who they think they are. It could be totally fictional and illusory,
Hmm.
this idealized image, and they spend their whole lives like modeling their desires off of this person that they have in their head. So models can mean a lot of different things. The point is that we need models, that humans are reliant on models, that we don't just generate desires out of thin air. Okay. And yes, mimesis or mimetic is a fancy word for imitation.
Hmm.
It comes from the Greek word mimestai, which is meant to imitate.
Yeah.
Now, the reason Girard didn't call it imitative desire It's a good question. Why didn't he just call it imitative desire? And,
Mhm.
like nobody would have to like look up new words in the dictionary. Uh, it is because he was trying to differentiate it a little bit from more open forms of imitation, more positive forms of imitation, like a baby imitates his or her mother and imitates maybe older siblings and imitates other people and teachers as we go through school. And imitation is generally open and positive, and we're not really embarrassed of it, as we're growing up. It's just something that we do. Girard used the word mimesis or memetic to try to get at something that in adults, I mean, really in people that are reach the age of adolescence and over, we tend to not imitate openly anymore. We tend to hide this kind of part of our nature and bury it because like we're embarrassed. We all want to think of ourselves as our own person. We kind of, we downplay the influence that other people have in our lives. And he was trying to say that this kind of hidden form of imitation is called mimesis. It's underground. It's often can lead to negative consequences and rivalries. And he was just trying to differentiate it a little bit from the word that we more commonly know.
And it's often even hidden from ourselves. Like we don't even know that we're imitating these people.
Totally. I had a good friend of mine. You know the movie A Few Good Men?
No, I don't know it. I don't know.
You don't know it? Okay.
No.
It's a movie that came out in the late 80s or early 90s. Even I was young when it came out. And I remember watching. So I had a friend of mine who watched that movie 20 years ago. And he rewatched it for the first time like a month ago. And he called me up and he was like, Luke, I rewatched this movie and I just realized for the very first time that for the last 20 years, I've been like saying things that I learned in that movie. I've been like sort of imitating like some of the things that one of the characters does. And he was like, dude, like this is like mimetic desire and mimesis. I didn't even know it until now I'm older and I could see it with fresh eyes and I realized what I've been doing. So that's kind of a simple, funny example, but I mean, that happens all the time.
So how did your relationship start with this mimetic desires?
Like learning about it.
Yeah. Not only learning about it, but when you first noticed that this was something that was going on in your life and you started to sort of make some type of change because of what you now know.
Yeah. So sorry, I just noticed you have like a Jeff Koons lookalike piece of artwork on your bookshelf. That's really cool. There's a whole mimetic story behind Koons, I think. So I graduated from undergrad business school. I worked on Wall Street and then moved to California and was in the startup world for all of my 20s.
Very successful also.
I had some success for sure. And I also had some failures. And I also had one company that I started and got bored with a year later and just kind of gave it to my business partner and was like, go for it. Like, I don't want to be in this business anymore. And I couldn't figure out, I mean, that's kind of a disconcerting feeling for me. Like I left a very good paying job on Wall Street in investment banking. I was totally miserable. And I went into that because of mimetic desire. I went to an undergrad business school at NYU where like, that's just what you are supposed to want. And if you don't want to work on Wall Street, then like something's wrong with you. Like, why would you not? Right. It's like the highest paying jobs. It's what supposedly the smartest, most ambitious kids do. And the messaging that I was given was like, the most ambitious, hardworking kids at the school get jobs on Wall Street. Therefore, if you don't, then you must not be ambitious and hardworking and smart. And I internalized that and I went for it and I got there and I was miserable. And I was like, well, maybe that narrative is bullshit. So I left after less than a year. I moved to California and I started my first company with my cousin. I ended up starting 4 companies. It depends on how you count because I had some spinoffs and stuff in my 20s. And some were very successful. And one of them, I was in talks to sell the company to Zappos.com, which is a large, very successful online shoe retailer. which is now owned by Amazon. And back in 2008, I was in talks with Tony Hsieh, who was a CEO, to merge our companies. And the deal fell through at the last minute. And I was initially sort of, shooken up by it and like, man, this is devastating. The deal's not going to go through. And I was in financial trouble at the time because in 2008, I was over leveraged. But within a very short period of time, I felt this tremendous sensation of relief wash over me. Like I felt more free than I'd ever felt in my whole life. Like wow. I couldn't it was like a weird sensation. I was like, why do I feel free and like relieved when something happened to me that most people would think is bad? And I took some time to sit with that. And, one of the things I realized right away was like, most of the goals that I've been pursuing had been given to me by other people. Everything from the college that I wanted to get into to like the things that I should study in college, my majors, to the kinds of jobs I should have after college. And then even when I thought I was escaping that, even when I thought I was like freeing myself from that by going into the startup world, I just fell into the same thing in a different version as an entrepreneur, just like one thing after another. And I started companies that I didn't even like. Imagine that, like, CEO, founder, freedom. And, we tell ourselves all these stories, like I'm my own boss and I'm doing this and my company is going to change the world. Well, it turns out like I was just starting things to create a quick valuation and sell the company. And then I got caught in doing things that I really didn't enjoy. So I realized at an existential level that something was going on. And it wasn't until a few years later, I went through like a dark night of the soul for a little while where I didn't know what was going on. I read everything I could get my hands on. I took some time off.
Is that when you went to Italy?
I went to Italy a little later. I ended up living in Italy for 3 years. But that was a little bit later in the process. But I was introduced to Girard around that time by a friend of mine who's like, hey, a mentor who, reads stuff that, like nobody else reads. But I trust him a lot. Right. And he translated Girard for me in a way that was easy for me to understand and said, you should really look into this thinker. There's this phenomenon called Mimetic Desire, and it might help you understand not only some of the things that were going on in your own life, like some of these things that were driving you to be passionate and then be disillusioned, but also to understand like some of the forces at work in the world, like kind of like what's going on in Silicon Valley, like what's going on with, college education, what's going on in politics. He's like, just read this, man, just trust me. And I did. And it was funny. It was introduced to me by like a few different people right around the same time. It's like, something's going on. Like he was trying to tell me something. Cause like, and people that didn't know each other, it really just almost immediately I saw the relevance for it. And that was a long time ago now. So I've been studying Girard, thinking about this stuff for a really long time.
And from your interview with Ryan Holiday, I know that Girard's work is very complex. You would say he sort of talks in a sign language. You have to really decode him. So when did you I don't want to say when, but once you really started grasping his main concept or concepts, how did that begin to change your life?
It took me a long time for it to really seep in. It took me a long time for me to absorb it. I saw right away that people are mimetic. That was easy. Like look around and I see kind of, herd-like behavior in everything from the market to like things that were my friends were doing. Like, I hit my early 30s and like all my friends want to run marathons all of a sudden. And like when one of them says he wants to run one, like the other 5 more want to do the same thing. Right. So,
or something that really surprised me that I didn't like, I had been noticing, but I couldn't put a name to it. Is like especially when you're in college, when a specific girl group thinks that you're hot or likes you, every girl in that group thinks that you're hot and likes you. Well, if the other one, like the most popular one, thinks you're ugly or you're just annoying, they all do. So they sort of have the same, perception of you depending on the girl group.
Totally. So the good news there is that you just got to find the one and get the one.
Yeah.
and then the rest will follow. No, it's a great example. All right. This stuff happens in attraction and romance all the time. I mean, it's not to say that there's not physiological bases for this stuff. Right? We know, I believe there's such thing as objective beauty, and we have hormones, and there's all kinds of chemical things that are going on, but there's also mimetic desire. And it's very powerful. And in fact, it's so powerful that it can usually override the biological stuff that's going on. Because desire is stronger than that. Human desire is incredibly powerful force. So, I saw it in everybody else but myself. And then I eventually saw that I'm as mimetic, if not more mimetic than most people, especially at that time in my life. And that was eye-opening for me. And it sort of gave me some like new lenses, like X-ray glasses, to see everything from literature, things I was reading, to my own life, to like being able to interpret current events through this lens. And once you see it, there's like no unseeing it, right? So you can never go back. And it's just allowed me to certainly be more introspective. And before I start going down paths, I'm a person, it can frustrate some people. I'm relatively slow to say yes to things because I recognize my mimetic tendencies sometimes, right? And I always check that. I check that with like careful discernment. I test my desires 100 different ways. And, I handle it a lot differently than I did when I was in my mid to late 20s.
You really highlight that difference. Let's say somebody offers you a partnership tomorrow. How would you analyze it when you were in your early 20s versus now?
When I was in my early 20s, I would probably take, probably go out for drinks one time with this person and like get plastered, and then wake up the next day and be like, he's cool, he's successful, like, boom, this makes sense. Like, let's go for it. What do we have to lose? Or I would just take somebody's word for it. Or, sort of like take this person on what I call mimetic authority, where it's like enough other people think that this person would make a good partner for me, and they can't possibly all be wrong. So I will, I'm gonna go for it. Right. That's very naive. It's a very sort of naive way to go through life. Not being able to evaluate for yourself what's best for you, to get underneath the layers of this mimetic stuff that's going on, to do the math, to do the work, right? To put in the time to actually get to know somebody for real, to have serious conversations. That just takes time. Now, not only do I just like allow relationships to develop over a much longer period of time than I would have, whereas before it's just like, let's go. In my, I'd like to think that in the wisdom that I've accumulated in the last, I'll just date myself, in the last like 18 years, I move a little bit slower because I'm going through a process of discernment. And, I do things like I take a week every year where I just go off by myself and in total silence, unplugged. And it's like that week of the year, for instance, if there's any lingering decisions, if there's anything that I haven't decided on, it usually all is very clear to me by the time that I leave that.
So yeah, taking your time to unplug and then coming back, you could probably see like some mimetic tendencies that you didn't see before, since you were so stuck in the machine.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, in other people and in myself. So let me give you one very concrete example of one thing that I look for and one thing that I use to like evaluate partnerships or relationships, business relationships. I actually am very sort of keenly aware of like mimetic tendencies in relationships, like mimetic dynamics. And like, let's say that I'm having some negotiation with a potential partner about something. I'm a very direct communicator. right? Like in a way that can make some people uncomfortable. So if I send like a direct email to somebody and I say, look, that's not going to work. Here's why that doesn't make sense to me. Boom, boom, boom. Can you please explain that? And they respond like very memetically and sort of like defensively, memetically, just kind of react to it. Huge red flag for me. You know, like if they're not able to kind of extract themselves from the, you know, the emotion or whatever. So I don't want to see anybody that's like hyper memetic and rivalrous in that way. And it happens that a lot of business partners, in fact, are like rivals to one another. It's like the thing that sinks most businesses. It's incredible. And we hardly ever talk about that at all. You know, we talk about the outside forces, but very rarely do we talk about the inside forces.
So talk to me about that. How can having the same memetic desires lead to conflict?
Sure. So memetic desire means that we, in some sense, adopt or take on the desire of somebody else through sort of contagion. You know, we become infected with the desire that somebody else already has. Let's say, I'm just trying to think of a specific example off the top of my head right now.
Tulum, Bitcoin, Miami.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, let's say that I decide to, I have a good friend in Washington, D.C. who's a crypto, like Bitcoin maximalist, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not a maximalist, but I definitely am in. In many ways, he's like a model to me, right? He's very successful. He's super smart when it comes to crypto. And this is actually a true story. And is basically about to move to Florida, not Miami, but like somewhere nice in Florida, right? And this is a person that I wouldn't call him a good friend, but he's just like somebody that I talk to, and we run ideas by each other. So I've sort of pursued, I mean, in many ways, he's a model of desire for me. Like I wouldn't have known about crypto and Bitcoin and Ethereum as early as I did were it not for him. So I do care about what he wants, because he tends to want things early on in the process. And, he's an early adopter, an early mover. And that's a competitive advantage for me because I know him. And I'm grateful for that. Right. The challenge is separating the good from the bad. So, he is a model for me in many ways, but, let's say that, what if he becomes so important of a model for me, that he moves to Miami, and, a week after he moves to Miami, I go to my wife and I'm like, hey, I'm going to uproot us and the whole family. We got to be in Miami, babe. Like this is where it's at. Like this guy was in on crypto early. Like Miami's where it's at. Like we got to get there. We got to get there now. And, here we are. And we get to Miami, we get a house right next door or in the same neighborhood because, this is the neighborhood to be in. It's very easy to all of a sudden become an unhealthy form of rival to people that could initially be positive models. We're constantly measuring, constantly paying attention. Now maybe we're competing for the same things. I don't know, man. Like maybe he starts a Substack newsletter about crypto and I start one, and so I mean, it can just get us caught in like never ending cycles of memetic chasing and memetic striving, where we can never escape our models, right? We always care too much about them, where if another path opens up for us in life, right? Just some opportunity comes knocking at the door, but we're so busy, we're so concerned with what these people in our lives that I would call models are doing, that we miss it. And that's one of the dangers of not knowing that we're being driven and pursuing things for memetic reasons. It's like, I use the example in the book of Lamborghini and Ferrari, like how those companies got started. Lamborghini started the car company. I mean, he made tractors, and he got into the car business because he owned a Ferrari, and he got frustrated with the way it was made because the clutch kept breaking. And he started a damn car company out of rivalry with Enzo Ferrari to show him that he could make as good of a car, a better car. And that year probably was a better car than a Ferrari. I don't want to weigh in on that debate. I don't know that much about cars, but in the year that first one came out, it was amazing. I mean, it was just a different in kind, right? Because it had like luxury elements that the Ferrari didn't have. But he was smart enough to realize that that's great. Like, we wouldn't have this car company in the world today if it weren't for that like fire in his gut to show Enzo Ferrari up. And I'm glad that he did it. But he was smart enough, not even smart enough, like emotionally intelligent and self-aware enough to know that rivalry, if he kept going, would never end well. He would be miserable for the rest of his life. And he realized that. And, there's now a Lamborghini winery in Italy, and where he retired there and lived happily until the end of his days and never got caught up in the racing games and everything. And, the car company's still around, but he was able to separate the positive from the negative.
Yeah, I could really see how competition, I personally try to avoid competition because I think most of the time it's a zero-sum game. I know there's healthy competition. I struggle to find it. So how can we use mimetic theory to know when to stop, to know exactly, okay, this is a good model, this is healthy competition, versus this is a bad model, and I could potentially screw something up or screw my life up if I keep going down the same path?
I'll give a really simple way to think about it. And this is a simple concept from mimetic theory, which is a really important concept to understand. So what makes a good model and what makes a bad model? What makes a bad model is that person starts imitating back. Okay. Like that person. So you end up in like what Girard calls a double bind, where you're actually both imitating each other, and you might not even know it. And there's such a thing as negative imitation, and negative or mirrored imitation is like, well, they do that, so I'm going to do the opposite. Right. They get a Tesla, I'm going to get a Rivian, which is a new form of electric truck. There's a funny story about the rapper Gucci Mane. When he was in Atlanta and he was just starting out, there was a rival gang that, put out a song called White Tea, and he put out a song called Black Tea. And his song was like edgier and a little more explicit. And he did it only because they put out a song called White Tea. That's just mirrored negative imitation. Now imagine if the other song, the other group put out a song called Red Tea, and like, where does that end? Right. It's just stupid. Right. So a bad model is a model that imitates you back. Girard says that there are two kinds of models. There's one kind of model that is outside of our worlds, and he calls this an external mediator of desire. They're outside of our worlds, meaning that they're no longer living. This could be like a great person from history or something like that. It could be like, LeBron James is outside of my world as a basketball player, and in most other domains of life. There's no possibility of us competing. So I can take these people as models. I can emulate them. In fact, I should. Like most great, athletes, like imitated the style or the behaviors of somebody else, right? So that's great. So those models are generally safe, and we should imitate them to the extent that they have something good to imitate. The danger lies when somebody is kind of inside of our world. Girard calls these internal mediators of desire. I call this the world of freshmanistan, because it's kind of like being a freshman in high school or college, where like everybody's kind of the same. Everybody can compete with everybody else. You're all kind of in the same boat. And what can happen in that kind of a world is you can enter into kind of an inescapable double bind where, you're looking to the other person, they're kind of looking to you. You're always trying to differentiate yourself from this other person or this other group. And that process of differentiation will never end. Like there's always like some little other thing that you can do to be different than, or to stand out. And that's just like, that to me is the definition of a zero-sum game. Like you've forgotten like what it is, like what's your ultimate goal in the first place. You end up caring more about the other people around you than on whatever the goal was. So it's really important to be able to step back. And, I don't really believe in like knowing what your end goal in life is. I don't think you have to know that. Like I've revised goals dozens of times because as I get older, I have a little more clarity. But it's still important to try to have like what's the highest possible good that you can be pursuing in your life. And it helps you like filter through some of the, kind of the mimetic noise around you that often comes in the form of other people. So like if you're in college, you have to separate for yourself, like how much of me wanting to be in this industry or to get a job at this company is coming from my ultimate goal in life, and how much of it is coming from what everybody around me wants. Mm-hmm. And I teach a class. I have mostly freshmen undergraduates in a business school here in DC. And I have all of them write a paper at the end of the semester. And it's about them sort of listing core values, like they do a future authoring exercise, like where they want to be in 20 years, like what they want their family life to look like, what kind of virtues they want to have developed by then, what kind of friends they want to have. And it's like going through that exercise, like really going through it well, imagining yourself, playing out the different things that would happen to make that possible. When you have some kind of idea like that, some kind of a roadmap, you're less likely to be enticed and entranced by some of the people, some of the influences that come in and out of your life on a daily, weekly, or even a yearly basis.
Like just last week, I interviewed Bill Burnett. He's from Stanford and he applies design thinking principles to designing your own life. And he has a similar methodology, but instead of just one potential life, he asks them to list out 3 potential lives. And the first one is, okay, the one you already think you want for yourself. Then the second one would be, if that gets automated or it disappears, what would your second life look like? And then the third one is the wild card life. That is, if money wasn't a problem and there was no way for you to feel shame, what would you be doing? And then it's sort of to let them know that there isn't just one path that you could take. There's a whole plethora of paths that are good to you.
Totally. Yeah. And I love Bill Burnett, by the way. And we do a similar thing, right? We remove constraints. We play with it, right? It's a great exercise. And then, part of that exercise is also like, do the same thing for your shadow side. What does your worst possible life look like in 20 years? And that's scary to go through, right? Like play that one out in your mind. Like if I keep drinking the way that I'm drinking right now, and if I, keep getting this amount of sleep, and if I keep hanging out with these people, like play it out. Like what happens? Go for it. And I really push them to do this, right? Like where will you be in 20 years? And that's like a fourth thing that we could add to Burnett's exercise, right? Like that's the shadow side of all this. Play that out 3 different ways too. So yeah, and you know what? It always changes, right? It's like a business plan. They're like ridiculous. I mean, you never actually like, the business plan is outdated like the next day after you write it. So I usually take a slightly different approach. But yeah, I mean, it's an iterative process for sure.
Awesome. And I also wanted to touch on Peter Thiel and his take on this mimetic theory. Is his take mostly business oriented and investing oriented, or what is it?
Well, I can't speak for Thiel. I mean, he's incredibly complex and I'm sure he's a very nuanced take on mimetic theory. So, we've talked, I think it goes way beyond investing and way beyond business. I think, Peter is interested in what mimetic theory has to say about relationships. I know that he put some principles in place to help mitigate some crises at PayPal in the early days when he and Elon Musk and Reid Hoffman, a bunch of other people were starting this company, and there were rivalries galore. Imagine like all these people, right? Like as part of the same startup. And, Girard was his mentor at Stanford, and, he knew the tendency toward rivalry in that kind of environment. So, one of the things he has shared is that he was intentional about, having clearly defined specific duties for each person so that they weren't competing over stupid things. He's interested in the theological implications of mimetic theory. There's a lot to be said for that. I didn't get into it as much as I probably would have liked in the book. maybe the next one. But so I know he's interested in that though. You can read the Bible, for instance, through the lens of mimetic desire, and it's crazy. Like it's like mind blowing when you read the Bible through the lens of mimetic theory. Because just to give you an example, there are 5 stories of sibling rivalry in the first book of Genesis alone. It's like, interesting. Why is that? Like, I don't care what you think or believe about the scripture. It's an important book for for all of civilization. And those stories contain important insights into what it means to be human. So Girard read all of scripture, trying to understand anthropology, trying to say like, well, what do these stories have to tell us about what it means to be human? Just like we can do with mythology. Like there's like really important things to learn in every myth. And Girard studied myth, he studied the Bible. So it opened my eyes to that. I know Peter's interested in that too. And I think he's and also like, how does this apply to politics? So mimetic theory has far-reaching consequences to almost every domain of life. That's what makes it really hard to to wrap your mind about, or to have like a podcast, right? Because like it's like, hey man, like we could go in like 10 different directions with this. But so I think his interest is like, what can I do as an entrepreneur who has a lot of capital resources to how does it shape the kind of investments I make, the kind of companies that are needed in the world today? So maybe that influenced why he started Palantir. I don't know.
So when it comes to businesses, what are some businesses that you see that are really implementing this correctly, using mimesis or mimetic theory to drive sales, to sort of manipulate people into wanting their products or services?
The answer, I mean, in terms of using it correctly, is none. I don't think that anybody has really even thought about how this works inside of a business, right? I don't think there's any. And this is a great interest of mine, as somebody who helps lead a center for entrepreneurship and who's still very much an entrepreneur myself. I'm interested in starting in any kind of venture that generates positive mimetic desire, that contributes to a healthy human ecology. I don't think it's been done yet. If I thought it had been, I'd probably go, join the company. I mean, I just don't think, so it might be something that I devote my attention to in the next 5 to 10 years. I think there are companies that are certainly, without knowing it, there might not be anybody in the company that's ever heard of René Girard or mimetic desire before, that know how to generate mimesis like crazy. I think every successful business has to get mimetic desire right at some level, right? It's like, because they have to know how to generate desire, to be able to grow, and one way to do that is obviously to have people, model the value of whatever they're doing, the value of the product or service. I mean, I think, we've seen some altcoins and cryptocurrencies that seem to very much understand the role of mimetic desire, maybe without even trying, right? You get Elon Musk to tweet something out. Dogecoin for sure. This is the oldest, joke in advertising, right? Is like you get somebody who's respected. You don't show your product, you show somebody wanting the product. And there's a lot of companies that I think do that really well. In terms of, social media is in itself an absolute engine of mimetic desire, because everybody is reinforcing the mimesis of everybody else on social media platforms. And even if we're rivals, or even if we're fighting or arguing or being nasty to each other in a Twitter thread or a Facebook post, like the platform wins. It's just more engagement. And, it's the whole thing is just designed to drive engagement. And they haven't, they just say that they're neutral, right? Like, we don't care if the engagement is positive or if the engagement is negative. Now, that's changed in the last couple of years. Now they're like, well, like, we want the engagement to be positive, but how do you possibly regulate that, right? I mean, that ends in some dystopian kind of future where, like, you're like evaluating my interactions with everybody to find out whether they're positive or possibly can lead to conflict in the real world or something. I don't see that ending well. So, we have a real dilemma on our hands, right? But I think social media is a good example. They've known how to generate and use mimesis to fuel their businesses for sure.
Yeah, and I feel it happening on me because I'm a Venezuelan, and a lot of Venezuelans now that live outside, they're going to El Salto Ángel, which is the biggest waterfall in the world, super beautiful. And they're posting about it and they're posting about it. And it's almost like everybody in the Venezuelan community is now going there for vacation. So it's incredible. It's
wow.
like,
Where's this waterfall at?
El Salto Ángel is called. It's in Venezuela.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's I that happens to me too all the time. I've gotten into van life on Instagram during COVID. These people, have you seen them? These are people that basically, like, they're minimalist. They give up everything, and they have these super cool vans that they trick out and decorate.
I have.
And then they just, like, go around to amazing places. And you just see a picture of their van with them, like, sunning on the roof of the van with this beautiful waterfall behind them. And I was joking, with Claire. I was like, I'm telling you, as I'm writing a book about mimetic desire, right? It's like endless jokes about this. I'm sitting here at 11 p.m. scrolling through my Instagram feed, like, hey, we should do this for a few months. We should get ourselves a van. No, but it's funny. It's funny how these things move in waves, right? And, like, what's fashionable one year probably won't be the next, and these things, like, really rise and fall.
Yeah, and it seems so obvious at the moment. It's like, okay, why didn't people like this type of haircut now? Or why do people like that afro that they had in the 70s? It's like, it comes in waves, as you said.
Yeah, a great example of that is disco music, man. Like disco had, like, rode a mimetic wave to extreme popularity. It was always there were some people that hated it, but I think it was the early 70s. All of a sudden, the mimesis turned away from disco. People started hating disco, and, like, the hatred contagion spread so fast. I don't know if you've heard this. There was actually a disco record burning party at a big baseball. I think it was Yankee Stadium or Met Stadium in New York City, and, like, people came out and burned all their disco records. And it's like, that's just a hilarious case of, like, a rise and fall driven largely by mimesis, and then at the end, probably by a little bit of scapegoating of disco music itself.
Yeah, and that one story that really drove it home for me in your book is the PR guy with the woman smoking. That's, like, how a company could perfectly use this mimesis to garner attention and garner desire for their product.
Yeah. It's an example of an extreme manipulation by Eddie Bernays. Do you want me to give a short version of that story?
Yeah, that'll be awesome.
Yeah. So Eddie Bernays was a nephew of Sigmund Freud in the early 20th century. So he was really extremely intelligent and understood psychology, understood his uncle's kind of psychological principles. But I also think he understood mimetic desire very well. And he was kind of considered the father of modern day public relations today. He kind of invented PR. Back then, though, he didn't call it public relations. He called it propaganda. In fact, the name of his most popular book was called Propaganda, and it was how to do PR. And he first learned how to do propaganda in World War I. He was recruited by the U.S. government to drum up support for the war, and he was incredibly successful. And he came back to the States and he said, well, if these tactics can be used for war, well, then they can also be used for other things. They can be used, for companies. So, make a really long story short, I mean, he launched an incredibly successful career, being hired by businesses, even some governments, to help them, sway opinion and to sway desire for various things. One of the people that came to him was the head of Lucky Strikes, American tobacco company. Their most famous brand was Lucky Strikes. Women didn't smoke in the 1920s. And if they did, they smoked at a home. It was taboo for women to smoke in public. Like, the men made fun of them. All the men were addicted because they were given cigarettes in the ration packs during the war. So they were all addicted to cigarettes. They were smoking like crazy, but the women couldn't. And the head of the tobacco company said, we're missing out on half of the market. And that half of the market is worth billions of dollars. And he hired Bernays and said, I need you to get women to start smoking. Like, what can we do? Paid him a huge retainer. And Bernays hacked Memetic Desire, and he gave the women models. So what he did is he targeted the 1929 Easter Day Parade as an event where he was going to change the tide and help women get to smoke. The 1929 the Easter Day Parade in the 20s was like the Super Bowl. It was like the event where all Americans paid attention to who was walking down Fifth Avenue in that parade on Easter Sunday. And he staged an event. And what he did was he found 10 or 12 highly attractive women. He gave them Lucky Strike cigarettes to hide in their purses or under their fancy overcoats. And after they came out of church for Easter Sunday in the morning and started walking down Fifth Avenue, at a certain cue, at a certain point, they whipped out their Lucky Strike cigarettes and defiantly started smoking them. First one, and then the other one would see her, and then she would take them out. And it gave the appearance that there was this spontaneous, like revolution, on the part of women to start smoking. But in fact, it was all orchestrated by Bernays. And, pretty soon, like, the memetic contagion took hold, and a bunch of women are walking down Fifth Avenue smoking cigarettes. And it was the illusion of spontaneity that was kind of his genius in this, right? The very next day, all the papers in the country ran a headline that said, women are smoking torches of freedom. Now that phrase, torches of freedom, was manufactured by Eddie Bernays because he knew that would be a meme, and that was a powerful meme that would catch on. And what did all these women across the country see? They saw these women defiantly smoking cigarettes on Fifth Avenue in these fancy coats. And the message being given was like, if I desire freedom, then I should be smoking cigarettes. And cigarettes became a symbol and a tool of empowerment. And he used this desire, almost used we could even say a rivalry with men, almost used it against the women, in the sense that, like, they took up smoking, like not a great habit to have, right? Yeah. They didn't know it at the time, right? But, like, sometimes we'll do anything if we have the right models modeling it for us, or if it helps us even to score with a rival, if it helps us achieve some kind of a status that we really wanted to achieve. We'll even do things that are detrimental to our health or whatever, if it means getting that. So, Bernays kind of hacked into this in an insidious way. I don't like the guy, there's story after story of him just, like, really manipulating people. But he's kind of the godfather of, of these modern day kind of tactics. And, it looks very different today than it did back then. But, that's the story of Bernays, right? I mean, his book is, if you read it, it's kind of scary because he put his finger on this stuff way back in the 20s and 30s.
That's crazy. So thank you for your time, Luke. Guys, if you don't want to get manipulated and you want to make decisions from a more rational, from a more, I would say, calm state of mind, really knowing, or at least thinking something about what's driving your decisions, you have to check out Luke's book. Luke, what's the name of your book if you want to promote it or promote anything that's coming your way now? You're
sure,
more than welcome to.
Thanks, man. Well, the name of the book is Wanting, the Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life. Wanting. And I write a Substack too at read.lukeburgis.com because I wrote 2 books and I had to cut half of it out to make it into one. So all the other stuff is going to be on the Substack if you want to check that out.
Awesome. And Luke, any last words you want to end with, man?
Oh, last words, man. I would just say this, it's important to understand how mimetic desire is working in your life so that you can develop a little bit of freedom, a little more anti-mimetic muscles, to be able to have some self-possession, to be able to resist some of the crowd behavior. But also remember that you're a model for somebody else, right? I mean, there's somebody who's looking to you. Could be a younger sibling, could be a friend. We're social, and what I want certainly affects what other people in my life want. So in that sense, there's this beautiful kind of like web of desire that we're all in. We're all a part of it. So, like, be responsible and keep that in mind. It's not just about us. Other people are looking to us, and we need to be positive examples and role models.
That's awesome, man. Thanks for your time, man.